Yeah, I'd love to respond, and maybe we could also, this could be the opportunity to hear from Clara too. Yeah, so we had the opportunity to visit Casa de Africa, a more so historical center in Santiago, as well as talk with several, particularly Cubans from the Martin Luther King Center, which is a Black-led, liberation theology-based civil, like independent organization, very active throughout the country, really focused on popular education. The overwhelming conclusion that we consistently heard from the Black Cubans in the schools and civil society was that systemic racism doesn't exist in Cuba. Like, it has for the most part, been eradicated. In that, at the beginning of the revolution, they made racism illegal. So that was the proposal. Now, Fidel, in many ways, reflected that didn't fix everything, because you can't just erase 500 years of internalized racism by just saying it's illegal. But what that did is it made segregation illegal. The fact that salaries are regulated by the government makes it so that salary discrimination, for the most part, does not exist significantly. If you look at life expectancies between different races, if you look at graduation levels, if you look at college participation, there is the flying colors in terms of the promoted equality in Cuba compared to other countries, let alone compared to the United States. It's hard to fathom here. And there's definitely, it's a challenge sometimes to look at it, because promoting unity has been a really big central feature of the Cuban effort, in that some people have the sense as if we're dividing ourselves amongst race, then we are opening ourselves up to be attacked from the outside. And I think constantly we see the more Cuban is attacked from externally, the more rigid they have to be with their policies. That's why the vast majority of Cubans will have a loaded gun in their houses, because they remember when Cubans from Florida would come in and bomb the sugar fields, bomb homes, the act of terrorism aided and supported by the US government. And so there are definitely strides to be made in terms of addressing, because even if you get rid of the barriers, people weren't starting at the same level. And so, like, you would have Black Cubans who would be in a 12-person household, white Cubans be in a 2-person household, and everyone has access to go to college. But if it's hard to study at home because you have so many people in your house versus you have all the computers, you're not starting at the same place. So there is still some work to be done to address that kind of lack of 40 acres and a mule, per se. Or actually, most people did get 40 acres and a mule, actually. But the lack of, the ways that Black Cubans were pushed back for so long. But I think even more so, the fight really is against racism in the mind, which a lot of Cubans would talk about, in that there's just still common phrases, still common tropes that come up that need to be more systemically addressed. And full disclosure, the person who asked the question was my dad. And one of the programs he's been working on is promoting a vaccine to racism, in terms of how can we inoculate our people against racism as a disease, knowing that if we know about our history, if we know about different cultures, we can inoculate ourselves to that. And that is actually something that is in development right now in Cuba. The commission to address racial issues in the country is working on a curriculum to promote in schools, as our country is destroying curriculums that promote racial equity. And so there is still a fight to be made. There surely is still a fight to be made in terms of addressing bigotry. There were like a few, the most we came up against in our visit were like some comments about microaggressions, but the work is happening. And yeah, it's definitely a good model that I think people who are interested in this issue should look more into.
So I want to give you a chance to talk about the Black and Brown Unity March that was part of the 5 days of the May Day.
Yeah. Yeah, have to talk about it. What a contrast to what's going on in Cuba. The attacks on African Americans and Chicanos and Latinos in the United States is only worsening. Under Trump, it's only like boldening. And so on May 3rd, we called for this Black and Brown Unity March. I want to quote Frank Chapman, the executive director of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. He had a quote that said, our unity or our solidarity is not charity. Our solidarity is mutual suffering. And that's that both of our communities have been suffering for decades and hundreds of years and continue to do so. And it's a necessity for us to unite against the racist Trump administration. There's, at times, there is like a contradiction between our communities. There is, antagonism at times in our communities, but as progressives and as people who understand how the system works, those antagonisms between our communities are minimal and can be overcome. And through actions like this, through organizing solidarity actions, we can unite our communities and lead the struggle forward towards getting rid of this Trump administration and pushing it out of our way. The true enemy of our communities. So yeah.
So you had a final
I
question?
wanted to speak about the politics of overcoming the blockade. But before I do so, I want to address this other question about the whether the issue of racism. It was made clear in presentations that the concept of race is completely unscientific and was imposed by the imperialists to rationalize slavery by inferior races. The whole concept was invented, and this is being promoted now in Cuba, that this is an invented concept, and not to take up racism. But now I want to turn to the other point about the politics of overcoming the blockade. I was part of the organizing for the May Day in Chicago in 2006. And at that time, people were very clear that it was the Democrats led by Deporter-in-Chief Obama, who was a key factor in the problem of immigration, that most of the Democrats had not addressed that question of the discrimination against immigrants. And those Democrats who also were instrumental in putting in the blockade against Cuba have continued to this day of not really addressing the issue of immigrants and equality for immigrants and recognizing the role they play and to ensure their safety, but have not taken a strong stand to oppose the blockade of Cuba either, with Obama being very clear that the aim was to overthrow the government of Cuba, that the old methods hadn't worked, let's try a new method. So and politically, we need to be very strong in opposing the blockade and not being fooled that one party or the other may be a vehicle for us. We have to be organized independently, would be the point I would want to make.
All right. Oh, all right, Byron.
Thank you, and I appreciate the conversation. We wanna thank you for the space. It's very important that labor gets involved in these issues as well. Planting, SCU 73 former stewards, so I'm glad SCU 73 is involved, and all the labor people in May Day. This is an important issue that concerns all of us. The city council in Chicago passed a resolution to lift embargo 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Now we have a resolution in committee, and the Committee to International Human Relations demanding that the United States takes Cuba out of the terrorist list. It is still in committee. We're trying to get it to a vote, but we don't have still enough members in support. So there's a date. We're still discussing is in Alderwoman Rodriguez Sanchez committee. It is potentially could be called for a vote on June 10th, but we want to make sure that we have enough we have a hearing on the matter. So for the committee, maybe I would recommend maybe reaching out to Alderwoman Rodriguez Sanchez, because as you know, we have a bunch of other issues that are being fleshed out, but this is priority for us. So I will ask that the committee reaches out to her. If it's possible to call it on June 10th and we're prepared, I think that is, of course, time is of the essence. But if not, we will have legislative break in August, so maybe July. But I do think this is an issue that we should all get involved about international solidarity, about the need to connect all working people. To us, I think it's very clear, the emperor has no clothes, and we have a one-party system. The class is the billionaire class, and the rest of us is the working people. So I think that we here in Chicago, we've seen there's a reason why they have an obsession with Chicago. Not only we are well organized, right? But there's a lot of history. There's a labor history. There's a history of resistance. And I think that outside of resistance in terms of civil disobedience, marches and all that, that is great. But I think Malcolm X says something very important, right? I think that we have the choices of the ballot or the bullet. And I think that unfortunately, in these times, all options are at the table. There's also elections for the Senate seat here. Dick Durbin is leaving, and it's a shame that he voted for that budget. But I think that here in Chicago, I think it's important that we continue to do all the organizing, inside, outside, grassroots, all in between. And these trips are nothing that gives our young people, I think you've heard it, it's really great that they have that perspective. I think those are gonna be the leaders that are going to make a huge difference here locally. So I think that we gotta continue making those connections, relationships. That was great. Hope that maybe one day we can bring some of those doctors that came into the west side of the city of Chicago when the federal government is cutting Medicare. I think that it'd be great to show how a small poor country in Latin America can make a huge difference on the west side when the federal government terrorizes people and send them abroad, violating human rights. So I think there's a lot of great examples and things that are happening here in Chicago. And I do think that Chicago will remain to be a place of resistance. And I think this is a key issue. So I encourage you, to connect with the Alderwoman Roxana Rodriguez Sanchez. This group is a great group so that we can push for this vote as soon as. Thank you.